right, welcome everyone. We're diving deep into learning English today. We've got someone's personal story about learning English in London. And it looks like it's packed with good stuff.
Definitely. I always find it interesting to see how someone actually tackled learning a language, especially from a first-hand perspective.
Right. Yeah, because textbooks are great, but nothing beats seeing how someone actually went about it. I think we can uncover some really cool techniques that they used, maybe even some surprising things along the way. The goal here is to take what worked for Ariel and figure out how it can apply to our listeners.
Yeah, for sure.
So Ariel's story begins on a train in London. She's listening to two English women just chatting. And even though she's only a beginner at this point, something just clicks. She decides right then and there that she wants to speak English fluently. She wants to have those types of conversations without even thinking about it.
It's funny, right? How, a simple event like that can be so motivating.
Yeah, for sure.
That little spark.
Yeah, absolutely. And from there, Ariel kind of jumps headfirst into the world of English. She starts translating texts, watching English films, basically making her own little immersion environment,
Right, which is super important. You're basically surrounding yourself with the language.
Absolutely, yeah.
So your brain can pick up on those patterns naturally.
It's like learning to swim by jumping in the pool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Ariel takes it even a step further and decides to move to London and attend an English language school. And that's where she meets this teacher that completely changes how she thinks about learning a language.
Ooh, I love this teacher already. What's so different?
Well, this teacher believes that language is about communication. It's about actually using it in real life. So forget all the grammar drills, the endless vocab lists. Her classroom is all about active use, experimenting, making mistakes without judgment.
That makes so much sense. I mean, you learn your native language by using it right, not by studying textbooks all day long.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what makes her approach so effective. She gets the students out there using English in the real world.
Not just learning the rules, but putting them into practice.
Right.
Okay, I love it. And Ariel, she takes this advice to heart, gets a job in a busy cafe.
Wow.
Which becomes her real-life language lab. Think about it. She's taking orders, chatting with customers, dealing with all sorts of conversations every single day.
It's so much more effective than just memorizing vocabulary lists, right? You're using it in context in situations that actually matter.
Like learning by doing.
Yeah, and probably a lot more engaging than staring at a textbook all day.
Absolutely. Okay, so building vocabulary.
Yes.
That's another common challenge for English learners. How did Ariel approach that? Because English has so many words, it can feel pretty overwhelming.
Well, Ariel's teacher has a really simple but effective strategy. Read. But not just anything. She emphasizes finding material that you actually enjoy.
So it's about making reading a pleasure, not a chore.
Exactly. When you enjoy what you're reading, the words are more likely to stick with you.
That's cool. It's like sneaking in the learning while you're having fun.
I love that.
Yeah.
And when you come across a new word, the teacher's advice is don't get bogged down trying to memorize it. Just look it up, get the basic meaning, and keep reading.
So it's more about understanding the flow of the text than dissecting every single word.
Precisely.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, pronunciation.
Ah, yeah.
I think a lot of people struggle with that, especially when learning English. Did Ariel face that challenge too?
She did. And actually, there's another student in the class, a young man from South Korea, who's having a tough time with pronunciation. And that's when the teacher introduces this really interesting technique called shadowing.
Shadowing?
Yeah.
Okay, I've heard of that. What is that all about?
Basically, you become an echo.
Okay.
You choose a piece of audio from a native speaker, could be a podcast, an audiobook, whatever, and you try to imitate their pronunciation as closely as you can. You're shadowing their speech, trying to match their rhythm, their intonation, even those tiny little pauses.
That sounds like a real challenge, and probably pretty funny to watch. Can you imagine trying to keep up with a native speaker like that?
It can be awkward, but it's incredibly effective. It's like a workout for your mouth muscles, training them to make those specific English sounds.
So it's like physical exercise for your pronunciation.
Precisely. And the interesting thing is, everyone in the class, even those who are skeptical at first, they all find that it actually helps.
Okay, shadowing is definitely going on my list of things to try. So everyone benefited, but was there anyone who seemed like super successful in the class?
There was this one student, Elizabeth, who really stood out. She was incredibly fluent, even though she mainly learned English on her own.
Wow, that's impressive. I'm guessing she has some secret techniques up her sleeve.
She does. One of them, and this might sound a little strange, is thinking aloud.
What?
Yeah, it involves consciously shifting your thought patterns.
Yeah.
From your native language to English. Even when you're not talking to anyone.
So like talking to yourself in English, that sounds a little crazy.
It might seem counterintuitive, but it's actually very powerful. Imagine you're constantly practicing English in your head, even when you're alone.
So instead of thinking in your native language and then translating, you're training your brain to think directly in English.
Yes. And Elizabeth said it was difficult at first, but eventually she found that she could think and express herself in English much more naturally.
I'm starting to see how all these techniques fit together. It's like building a multi-layered approach to language learning. You've got immersion, practical use, targeted techniques like shadowing and thinking aloud.
Right. And it reminds us that fluency isn't just about memorizing words and grammar rules. It's about changing how you think, training your brain to actually operate in English.
That's fascinating. Okay, so I think a lot of listeners are probably thinking about grammar right now. It can be a tricky part of learning English.
It definitely can be. And one of the students in Ariel's class brings up this exact concern. They're feeling overwhelmed by all the rules, the exceptions. But Ariel's teacher has two different approaches for learning grammar, recognizing that people learn in different ways.
That's great. So what are those two approaches?
Well, for those who want to acquire grammar more naturally, her advice is to simply read a lot.
Okay.
Good books, well-written articles, they all act as models for correct grammar usage. And by immersing yourself in these texts, you start to internalize those patterns without even realizing it.
So it's like absorbing good grammar by simply being exposed to it.
Exactly. And for those who prefer a more structured approach, she recommends a website called grammerinlevels.com. It breaks down grammar concepts into digestible chunks, based on your current English level.
So you can focus on what's relevant to you right now instead of getting lost in a sea of complicated rules.
Exactly. Now, there's one more aspect of language learning that we need to talk about, and it's something that I think holds a lot of people back. The fear of making mistakes.
Oh, I think everyone can relate to that, especially when you're learning a new language. Did they talk about that in Ariel's class at all?
They did. One student admitted that she's terrified of making mistakes, so much so that she hesitates to even speak. But Ariel's teacher has a really powerful way of looking at this fear.
Oh, I'd love to hear this. What's her perspective?
She compares it to learning a musical instrument. When you first start playing, you're going to hit wrong notes, you're going to fumble, but that's all part of it. You wouldn't let those mistakes stop you from practicing, would you?
That's a great analogy. It really takes the pressure off being perfect.
It does. And she points out that children, when they're learning their native language, they make tons of mistakes. But it doesn't stop them from communicating. They're focused on getting their message across, on connecting with the world around them. And that's what matters.
So it's about shifting your focus from perfection to connection.
Exactly. And this is especially important when you're just starting out. The goal isn't to sound like a native speaker right away. It's to start using the language, to build confidence, and to actually enjoy the process.
That's such a liberating perspective. It takes the pressure off and allows us to be more playful.
Exactly. And she even shares her own experience learning Spanish. She admits she still makes mistakes, but she sees it as part of the journey.
That's encouraging to hear. It shows that even experienced language learners make mistakes, and it's okay.
It is.
So what's the takeaway for our listener?
Embrace those mistakes. See them as chances to learn and grow. And remember, the goal is to communicate, to connect, to express yourself, not to be perfect.
I love that. It's such a positive message. And, speaking of embracing mistakes, I'm curious to hear how Ariel applies all this in her job at the cafe. I mean, that's a real-world environment, full of opportunities for both successes and those slip-ups.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll see how Ariel handles those real-life language challenges and uncover even more helpful insights.
Sounds good. Stay tuned, everyone. We'll be back with more of Ariel's story in just a bit. Welcome back, everyone. We're continuing our deep dive with Ariel and her English learning journey. I think we're going to find some even more practical tips this time around.
Oh yeah, definitely. And what I like is it's not just theory. We're seeing how these techniques actually play out, in real life.
Exactly. And what better place to put them to the test than the real world? Last time, we left off with Ariel working at a cafe in London.
Oh wow, a busy cafe in London. That's pretty immersive.
Talk about immersive. But before we get into that, I wanted to go back to something we touched on earlier, vocabulary.
Okay.
I know a lot of people get kind of intimidated by, thinking about how many words they need to learn to be fluent.
It's one of those big hurdles, yeah.
And it can be daunting. But Ariel's teacher introduces a pretty neat tool, a website called testyourvocab.com.
Oh, a vocabulary test.
A vocabulary test. I always like those. It's kind of fun to see where you stand.
Yeah, me too. And for Ariel, it's a real eye-opener.
Okay.
She finds out she knows around 2,100 English words.
Wow. That's a lot. Or is that not a lot? I don't even know.
Well, it gives her a starting point, right?
No, okay.
Instead of being overwhelmed by the sheer number of words in the English language,
You've got a number?
you have a concrete number to work with.
Okay.
Did the other students take the test?
They did. And most of them scored in a similar range.
Yeah.
Which actually created a kind of camaraderie.
Yeah.
They're all in it together on a similar playing field.
That must have been really comforting.
It was. There's always a couple overachievers in every class, though.
Oh, of course. There always is.
Monica had a knack for picking up vocabulary, and the South Korean student had been working really hard to expand his word bank.
Wow, that's great. So everyone learns at their own pace, which is good.
Right, exactly.
So knowing her vocabulary size, how did that help Ariel going forward?
Well, remember that grammar website, the grammarinlevels.com that the teacher recommended. Ariel decided to give it a try, and because she knew she had this vocabulary foundation, she could confidently look at the grammar explanations for level 2, even start peeking into level 3.
So smart. It's like she's using her vocabulary as a guide for grammar.
Right.
Did she like the website?
Oh, she loved it. It was clear, it was organized, and it broke down all those tricky grammar concepts into bite-sized pieces.
It sounds like a good one. I might have to check it out myself. But back to pronunciation for a second.
Yeah.
We know that Ariel had been trying that shadowing technique. How did that work out for her?
Well, she decided to go all in on it. Spent the entire weekend shadowing native speakers. And she didn't go easy on herself. By Sunday evening, her mouth muscles were actually sore.
Oh, wow. She really
Right.
committed. I can relate to that, though. I mean, have you ever tried shadowing?
Oh yeah, of course. It can be quite a workout, especially when you're pushing yourself to match the speed and the intonation of a native speaker.
It takes effort.
It does. But Ariel's dedication pays off. When she gets to class on Monday, one of the other students mentions that her pronunciation sounds so much clearer.
That's great. That must have felt good.
It did. It's one thing to feel like you're making progress, but to have someone else notice, that's really validating.
Absolutely.
And you know what's even better? Ariel's enthusiasm was contagious. 3 other students, including the young man from South Korea, said that they had started experimenting with shadowing over the weekend.
That's awesome. They're all inspiring each other to try new things.
They are.
But shadowing can be tough, especially when you're first starting out.
You're right, and one student brought up a really common problem. She found it hard to keep up with the speed of the recordings.
Right.
She was overwhelmed and she felt a bit discouraged. But Ariel's teacher had some really good advice for her.
What did she say?
She said, don't worry about repeating every single word. Instead, focus on the first or last word of each sentence, or even just the stressed syllables.
Okay, so break it down into smaller pieces.
Yeah, exactly. It's about gradually building comfort and accuracy. And remember, shadowing is not just about pronunciation. It's about getting the rhythm, the intonation, that natural flow of connected speech.
Like you're absorbing the music of the language.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as you practice, you'll find yourself incorporating those elements more naturally into your own speech. Now, there's one other important point that the teacher brings up in this part of the story.
Okay.
And it goes back to our earlier conversation about making mistakes.
Right. That one student who was so afraid to speak because she didn't want to make any errors.
Exactly. And the teacher brings up that fear again, knowing how common it is.
Yeah.
But she gives a really great perspective on it.
I'm all ears. What is it?
She reminds everyone that making mistakes is just a natural part of the process. It's not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're pushing yourself and that you're actually engaging with the language.
Like those fail forward motivational posters.
Exactly. And she compares it to learning to play a musical instrument. When you first start, you're going to hit wrong notes, you're going to stumble, but you wouldn't let that stop you from practicing, would you?
No, of course not.
Right.
It's all part of the learning curve.
Exactly. And she says perfection is not the goal, especially not at the beginning. The focus should be on communication, on conveying your message, on connecting with others.
So it's not about speaking perfectly, it's about getting your point across.
Yes.
Even if it's not grammatically perfect.
Exactly. Mistakes are just feedback, guiding you toward fluency.
I love that. It takes so much pressure off.
It does. And she encourages the students to remember that everyone who learns a new language starts at the same place. With the same uncertainties, the same challenges. Even native speakers make mistakes sometimes.
Oh, totally. All the time.
It's just part of being human, right?
It is.
Language learning is a journey, not a destination.
It's about embracing the process.
Yes, exactly. And to celebrate those small victories. Each time you communicate an idea, each time you understand a new phrase, each time you pronounce a word correctly, acknowledge that progress, no matter how small it seems.
Those small wins really add up.
They do.
They keep you going.
Yes. And the teacher even shares her own experience learning Spanish.
Oh, okay.
She admits she still makes mistakes, but she doesn't let that hold her back from speaking and interacting with native speakers.
That's inspiring. It shows that even experienced language learners are okay with not being perfect.
Exactly. And that's the message that she wants her students to really take to heart, embrace those mistakes, learn from them, and keep going.
So it's not about avoiding mistakes, it's about changing your mindset.
Yeah.
Seeing those mistakes as opportunities to learn.
Exactly. And, as we see Ariel navigate her job at the cafe, we realize she's really taken this to heart. She's not afraid to make those mistakes anymore. She's using every interaction as a chance to practice and get better.
She's putting herself out there, taking those risks.
She is.
And ultimately, that's how you improve.
It is. Now, are you ready to see how Ariel handles those real-life language challenges at the cafe?
I am. Let's do it. And we're back. It's time to wrap up our deep dive into Ariel's English learning journey. And, I'm really curious to see how all these techniques she's been trying actually work out for her.
I know, me too.
Yeah.
We've seen her tackle vocabulary, grammar, and even that fear of making mistakes. But now it's time for the real test.
Right, exactly. Because the real world, that's the ultimate language lab. And we left off with Ariel working at that cafe in London. Remember? Super busy, lots of customers.
The perfect setting to practice, right? And in this last part of her story, we see a real change in her confidence.
Okay, tell me more. I'm intrigued.
So during a class discussion, one of the other students actually mentions that Ariel's pronunciation has gotten so much better. They even say she sounds more natural, more confident.
Wow, that's so cool. It's like all those shadowing sessions and stuff are really paying off.
They are. And Ariel doesn't hesitate to share her little secret weapon.
What, the sore mouth muscles?
Exactly. She tells the class about those weekend shadowing marathons.
Oh, yeah. She really went for it.
She did. And it's funny because a few other students chime in and say they've started experimenting with shadowing too. And they're seeing results.
Love that. See, sharing your learning journey can really inspire others.
Absolutely. And that's when the teacher brings up the fear of making mistakes again.
Yeah, it's always there, lurking in the background.
It is, especially when you're in a situation like that, working in a busy cafe.
Yeah, lots of pressure.
Right. So the teacher acknowledges that fear, but she has this really clever analogy to help the students think about it differently.
Okay, I love a good analogy. What is it?
She compares learning English to learning a musical instrument. When you first start playing, you're going to hit wrong notes. You're going to make mistakes.
Of course it happens to everyone.
Right. It's part of the learning process.
It's those first piano lessons where you're like hunting and pecking for the right keys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't let those early mistakes stop you from practicing, would you? The same goes for learning a language. Mistakes, they're not failures. They're just part of the path.
Right. They're like signposts showing you where to go next.
Yes. And she really emphasizes that perfection is not the goal, especially not when you're starting out. The most important thing is communication, getting your message across, connecting with people.
So it's not about speaking flawlessly. It's about using the language to connect with others.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And she also reminds everyone to be kind to themselves. We all start at the same place with the same uncertainties and challenges. And even native speakers, we make mistakes all the time.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's just part of being human. Language learning, it's a journey, not a destination.
Love that. Okay, so I have to ask, does Ariel put all this advice into action at the cafe?
She does. We see her navigate all sorts of situations, taking orders, dealing with customer requests, all while using her English.
I can just imagine all the things that could come up in a busy cafe.
Oh, there are definitely some funny moments. But even when she makes a mistake, she doesn't let it get her down.
Because she remembers it's all part of the process.
Exactly. She uses those moments as learning opportunities,
Yeah.
and her confidence just keeps growing.
That's what it's all about, right?
It is. And as her story ends, we're left with the sense that she's not just learning English. She's really embracing a new way of being in the world.
She's becoming a more confident communicator.
Yes. And it reminds us that language learning is not just about the words and the grammar, it's about unlocking new possibilities, you know, building relationships and experiencing the world in a whole new way.
So it's about personal growth as much as it is about language.
Exactly.
Wow, that was inspiring. I love Ariel's story and all those great tips, and I hope our listeners found it useful too.
I hope so too. Remember, everyone, embrace those challenges, celebrate your progress, and never stop exploring the wonderful world of language.
Until next time, happy learning.